Hello and welcome to today's Passport to the Past for Schools, up your street, suitable for Key Stage 2 and Key Stage 3 with national curriculum links to history. Today we are going to be looking at places where people live, whether it be a flat, a house, a boat, a caravan or something else. So what will you need during the session? Well, first of all, if you've had a chance to print out the Passport to the Past resources, then those will be really useful and you can see those on the left-hand side. You can find those at the link you can see on the page. If you haven't had a chance to print these out, please don't worry, it won't stop you participating. What you will need for today's session is a pencil or a pen, a ruler or a straight edge, such as the edge of a book, several pieces of plain paper and a hard surface, and if you have a sharpener and a rubber, that will be useful as well. So first of all, hello and welcome to all of you. So what will we be doing in this session? Well, first of all, we'll be finding out about the history of dwellings. Next, we'll be finding out about where you live and what's so great about it. And finally, we're going to be making a plan of your home, and that's the bit where you'll need the pencils and the paper for. So first of all, a little bit about the history of homes. So some of the first homes were called round houses, and you can see one there in the picture. These were circular homes and they had a thatched roof and they also had a fire inside. So when the Romans invaded 2,000 years ago, people started living in houses which are a lot more like the ones that we see today. They were called villas. And these were rectangular houses that were built from stone and tiles. Now they had those beautiful mosaic floors, so they would have lovely designs, lovely pictures, and they also had underfloor heating. Now, Tudor houses are the ones that followed on really from villas. And we'll just bring up a little picture there so you can see what they look like. And they started being built about 600 years ago. They tended to have a wooden frame, as you can see in the picture. And then in between the wooden frame, you would have something called wattle and daub panels. Did you know that Tudor houses today, they tend to be black and white, but in fact when they were built they weren't black and white at all. They tended to have either white or pink panelling, so that's the bit in between the wooden structure, and the wooden structure itself tended to just be left the colour of wood, so it would start off as light brown and it would end up grey after a few years. But today we tend to think they're black and white, don't we? And did you know that wattle and daub is actually where you weave twigs together, and then what you do is you pack it all in with lots of mud. Daub actually means dirt, but there's actually more in daub than just dirt. What they used to do is they used to cut up things like straw, horsehair. They even used cow dung to pack it all together to make it nice and strong. If you're feeling like it, this is something that I suggest you have a go at home. You can mix it up in a bucket. I just recommend telling your parents before you do it. And there's a picture of what it looked like. Later on, it became much more common to build houses in stone with large glassed windows. Window tax is a really interesting one. Now, you may not have noticed this, but if ever you're wandering down the street and you see quite old buildings, so ones that are more than about 150 years old, you might notice that some of them have been blocked up with bricks, and you might think that's a bit of a strange thing to do. Well, what caused that to happen was that in the past they decided to tax people according to how many windows they had. And then people were clever about this and said, well, if we block up the windows so they're no longer windows, we won't have to pay as much money. And that explains today why you tend to see that so regularly. Did you also know that the size of families has actually shrunk over the last few years? So if we go back to the 1950s, the average number of children was just under 4 children per family. And if I look at, for example, my father's family, he has 6 brothers and sisters. So in the past, people did tend to have slightly larger families than today. Today, we have on average about 2 children. Have a moment and have a think about what that might mean for houses being built today. Did you also know that in the past, most dwellings did not have an indoor toilet or a bath? And there on the left-hand side, we can actually see a steel bath, and that's the sort of thing that they used to drag into the houses in front of the fire, heat up the hot water, and then what would happen is each member of the family, normally starting with the father, would take turns to have a bath until the youngest child got in there last. Now, if you were from one of those big families, I'm sure being the youngest wouldn't have been much fun at bath time. And a steel bath could be used, but in other households, people used to go to an actual bathhouse. And in fact, my mother, when she was growing up, they didn't have a toilet indoors. They did have one in the garden, but they didn't have a steel bath. And what they used to do is they used to go to the local bathhouse once a week and have their weekly bath. And actually, if you look on the picture, you can see that there is a urinal or a chamber pot just underneath the bed. So back in the days when there was only a toilet in the garden, if you needed to go in the middle of the night, you would have one of these pots that you did your business in. And then you had some people who were called night soilmen. And this is one of the worst jobs you could possibly imagine. And they would come to your house every day and they would collect everything that you did in the chamber pot overnight, and they would normally pay you for it. It would only be a small amount of money, but you know, they would also take away all the stuff that you didn't want. And then they would sell this on to people like farmers who would use it to fertilize their crops. Did you also know that privacy today is relatively a modern idea? That in the past, most people used to live quite close to each other, and it was quite normal to have a whole family living in one room. And ask yourself today, do you share a room with a brother or sister? Now ask your parents, did they share a room with their brother and sister? Most of the time, you'll find that children today get a room to themselves. But if you ask people from the past, quite often they shared a room with a brother or sister. And if we were able to go back even further, we might find that whole families were sleeping in one room. Even kings and queens in the past had servants sleeping in their room. Did you also know an important position in the royal household was the groom of the stall, whose task it was to help the king when he went to the toilet? Can you imagine that? And actually, what is quite amazing about that job, you'd think nobody would want such a job, but in fact, it was a very sought after position to have in the royal household, because what it meant was that you had the king all to yourself in a quiet moment, so you could speak to him privately, which lots of people couldn't. And 150 years ago, they didn't even have numbers on houses. So this is another good moment for you to just stop and have a little think. If they didn't have numbers on houses, how in the past did they manage to deliver things like mail? How did they know where to go to? And not all people live in traditional houses. Some people live in caravans, tents, caves, and even boats. And we can see some examples here. So these pictures I'm showing you here are pictures from Turkey, and these are from Turkish cave houses that people were living in until quite recently. This isn't just something that people do in other countries. There are examples of these as well in the United Kingdom. And here we have an example of people living in a Vado caravan, so that is a traveller caravan. And here we have an example of a really nice houseboat with some plants on the top of it. So although today most people live in houses or flats, not everybody does. And some people still have the types of properties that we're going to learn about that actually are on the move. So we're now going to stop for a moment and give you a chance to have a go at thinking about where you live. And I'm going to be putting up this questionnaire on the screen. Get a pen and paper, and this is your opportunity now to just answer these questions, have a look, see what type of house you live in, and then if you like, to share your results with the other people around you. So we're now going to have a think about property and about getting permission to live where you are. So are you planning to stay? Well, some people have always preferred to live in homes which can move around. One advantage of having a movable home is that you don't have to have any planning permission. If you build a new house or even make changes to a house, you need to get permission from the local council. This is to stop houses being built in areas where nature is protected or places which are not suitable, for example, areas which are likely to flood. It also helps to make sure that houses aren't built too close together. With a growing population, house sizes have been getting smaller since the 1970s. And when we were talking earlier about the fact that the size of families have got smaller, maybe one of the things that you thought about was the fact that the houses are probably getting smaller as well. So we do have tower blocks. Now, tower blocks are ideal because it's one way to find enough space for people to live by building upwards. That way, lots of people could live in a smaller space. Lots of tower blocks like Clapham Court in the middle of Gloucester were built in the 1960s and the 1970s. And Clapham Court, which you can see on the picture on the left, is the only tower block in the whole of Gloucestershire, and it is due to be demolished, so it's going to be knocked down very soon. The people who live there are moving to new homes, and at only 10 stories, that's each one is a floor high, it is quite a small tower block. The tallest tower block with people living in it is in London, and it has 60 floors, that's stories. And imagine the view from the top of there. And here we have some pictures. You can see that on the right-hand side, we have the Shard, which is a very famous building in London. They do still get built, but they tend to provide offices rather than homes. And we now have a little activity for you, and this one is very much for you to discuss amongst yourselves. So you're going to imagine that you are the planning officer for an area of Gloucestershire. Builder wants to build 10 new homes in a village in a very rural, that means in the countryside, area with no buses. You know that there are people who need new homes in this area. The area has lots of trees and open spaces. A very rare flower grows where the houses are to be built. And people in the village don't want any new homes. They like things as they are. And there aren't any children or young families in the village. Most of the people who live there are getting older. There isn't a shop or a school in the village. So what I want you to do now, and you can do this by yourself or by talking amongst yourselves, you have to decide whether these new houses should be built. What do you need to think about to help you make the right decision? So we're now going to move on to another activity, and we're going to have a go at making our own plan of our houses. So we're going to be creating a plan of your house. So here we have the floor plan of a modern bungalow. A bungalow, if you're not sure, is a house which has no upper level, so it has no stairs in it. So looking at the plan next to you, I know the writing is a little bit blurry, but can you see how many bedrooms there are? Can you see how many bathrooms or toilets there are? Can you see where the front door is? And can you see how people move between the rooms? I'll just let you have a little think about that. And when we come to make our own plans in a moment, you may want to just stick to doing the ground floor, or you may want to have a go at doing both of the floors. And just to give you an example, so here at the archives, we have lots of plans for lots of different types of buildings, and a lot of these are floor plans. And we can see here a plan of a development that took place, and it was called the Old School. So you can probably tell what that building used to be before it was turned into a house. And there you can see on the image to the left, you can see, first of all, overhead view, and that's with the roof on. You can then see a side view of the house, so what it actually looked like from the front. And then you can see I've just blown up the bit that is really of interest to us, which is the floor plan itself. And I'll just give you a few seconds to have a look at each of those bits. Okay, so we're now going to move on to doing the floor plan yourself. So you can see an example of this. This shows a bathroom on a floor plan, and you can see the bath, the toilet and sink from above. You can also see that the door has been drawn like this, and it's done like that to show that this is where the opening is, because of course all rooms, we must remember to put doors into them. You don't need to include measurements on a floor plan, but you might have to have an idea about what sort of shape it is. And also, if you're going to be doing the entire floor of a building, you want to know which rooms are bigger than other ones. Okay, so we're now going to imagine that someone has taken the roof off the house that you live in, and you're going to have a go at drawing the plan for yourself. You're going to need a pencil and a ruler. I suggest very strongly that before you do it in really dark pen or put it to use the pencil too heavily, that first of all you plot it out really nice and thinly, just so that you can rub it out if you need to change it. So try mapping it out first. If you're finding it too difficult to imagine the whole floor, start off with one room, perhaps start off with your bedroom or a bathroom or the lounge, and see how you can get on. And you might want to think about what you might want to include. So you might want to include the room names, think about where the doors have got to go, and you might want to include some of the furniture as well. If you're feeling very ambitious, you can also try and put the outside in as well. So if you have any garden, if you've got any trees, anything like that. Okay, so just moving on now to the final activity. And this is something that we're not going to do in the session, but something I suggest you could do for homework, which is to, now we've had a look at all these different types of buildings and you've had a go at drawing a nice accurate floor plan, is to have a go at drawing your dream home. Now remember that your dream home, you don't need to worry about it being a traditional house. You can draw whatever you like. So if you want to have slides coming out of your windows, if you want to have a swimming pool on the second floor, you can do whatever you like. If you want to build it in a tree, then that is up to you. So with this one, you don't need to be constrained by what is actually there. I want you to be as creative as possible. Okay, so thank you so much for joining us today. I just want to tell you about our next session. So our next session is going to be focused on the Tudors, and it's going to be called Quills and Thrills. And you can see there that rather furious looking man is John Putley. Now, John Putley is a barber surgeon, a Tudor barber surgeon. He's going to be joining us in the next session, and he's going to be telling us about what happened when you got sick. And let me tell you, that if you were in the Tudor times, you really wouldn't want to get sick and go and see John Putley. It's going to be a bit gory, but I think you'll really enjoy it. Thank you and goodbye.